So today I want to review Fritz the Cat, which is a 1972 Ralph Bakshi film. And this is definitely one of the most controversial films ever made, and it's also one of the most important films in all of animation because it is the first X-rated Western cartoon. There are Japanese animes and animated movies that were X-rated prior to this. And also, there were some like Looney Tunes cartoons or animations during Prohibition or other parts of history, in the 30s and 40s that were, banned in some places or were just not shown to the public because people just felt it would be a bad influence. Like I remember watching something on Cartoon Network. I'm sorry to go on a tangent. In the 90s where they showed cartoons during Prohibition, and they said that they were not allowed to show that. It was blocked until now because they just didn't want to encourage people to drink or have bad habits back in the 20s, even though there were cartoons that kind of just celebrate drinking, they didn't want to show it back then. So even though those films were kind of X-rated and before Fritz the Cat, this is kind of the first X-rated animated film. And definitely with Ralph Bakshi, he's known for the animated Lord of the Rings. That's kind of his magnum opus. He also did Coonskin and Heavy Traffic. I've never seen Heavy Traffic. But he also did Coonskin, which I reviewed on this channel, and I may review it again since I'm older and wiser. But Fritz the Cat is about this cat named Fritz. It's based on a comic book strip, and it's way different from the comic. So, Fritz the Cat is this college student, and he's also a musician. So, what he usually does is he picks up girls, and he wants to have sexual orgies with them. And also, he thinks that he's this theologian and this big speaker of the beatnik generation. He thinks he's the next Allen Ginsberg or the next Malcolm X, just trying to call people to action. But he's ultimately not. That's who he thinks he is. But he's really just a person that is a sexual predator. Doesn't really appreciate that. Is also very misogynistic. And also just gets himself in lots and lots of trouble, and he's not really somebody that learns from his actions. Imagine if he's almost like a Peter Griffin type of person, or Eric Cartman type of person, somebody that will never ever learn from their actions, and ultimately just care about their own desires. So I think that, with Fritz the Cat, I would say that I want to get into the main theme. I think the main theme of this film is manipulation, because what happens in Fritz the Cat is broken off into three sections. The first movie is about the first part of the movie is Fritz the Cat in Washington Square, and he's picking up a couple of girls, and he picks up these girls, and he's kind of saying follow me, we're gonna seek the truth, and how we're gonna seek the truth is that they all get into a bathtub, they have sex with each other, and they do drugs, and then it turns into an orgy that gets interrupted, and I say it's manipulation because obviously these are young girls who are very naive, and they're college educated. But then here comes Fritz the Cat, and he's kind of there is he kind of finds them attractive, and he's like, what, I'm gonna teach. I want to show them the truth, and the truth is basically maybe an enlightenment, and the enlightenment is that there's peace and love going on in the 60s. So you want to give them the enlightenment of peace and love through just what's not pressuring, but definitely manipulating them into doing an orgy and just thinking that's normal, and that's what goes down. And I think the other thing I'll say about the girls, because this is important in the film, there's a lot of different themes in this, is that they pass Fritz the Cat and his friends who are playing big violins in the park, and they're actually talking to a black crow. All the black characters are portrayed as crows. All the white characters are portrayed as different animals, like cats and just like cats and pigs, or dogs or whatever. So these girls talk to this black crow. Because obviously Black Crow, Jim Crow. Also, if you watch Dumbo, they had the racist black crows. But the thing is that they're talking to this black crow in the park, and they're like, wow, I'm inspired by the black culture. I understand the black struggle. I've read all of James Baldwin. I understand how black people feel. Black people and Jewish people are almost treated the same way. And then I think the Crow says, I'm not some jive nigger, and I like that because I am part African, and I do understand there's a lot of people who think that they understand how black people feel because they read up on it, or they kind of feel like they want to feel extra sorry for black people because of the racism in the country. But the thing is that you don't understand black unless you've been black. I've been called a nigger many times in my life. I've dealt with racism in the film community. I was almost murdered by the police. I lived with white parents that think that I'm a black man when I'm actually multiracial, but and I grew up in a lot of white communities where I was the black guy, But I have a part black and part Native American mother, and a part white and a white dad. But most people consider me black because they know about my mother, and they just say, "Oh, you're brown. That means you're black." If my last name was Andreas or Rodriguez, then they'll say, okay, well, then you're a Mexican or whatever. So it's unfortunate, but I like that because, that really hit home to me. That was like, yeah, I'm happy that they talked about that because even you see that nowadays where there's people who want to just think that they understand black culture, but they really, really don't. Or or say they sympathize or they understand what a black man or black people go through. You don't, because you're not that person. So I like that they featured that. And then the next part is that another big element is that there's the pigs, the cops. So obviously, while they're having this drug orgy, that the pigs just know that the house has a lot of problem. The house that has a complaint, they're going to investigate, and they're really, really incompetent. There's like one pig who kind of knows what they're doing, and he's guiding another pig cop who doesn't know what he's doing, and saying things like, can I feel up the girls? And one of the girls in the orgy is actually wants to have sex with one of the police officers. So there's this thing about how police can be easily corrupted, they can be incompetent. They can be actually, religious people or Jewish or people who follow religion really strictly, but be extreme hypocrites. Like they're taught religion, they're taught forgiveness and understanding. He cast the first in. He cast the first stone. That story of Jesus when he was talking about he without sin cast the first stone, but then these police officers are super violent and they react on their emotions, either if it's sexual desires, or there's a scene later on in the film where one police officer gets a glass bottle broken in his face, and then he goes shoots guns off in Harlem because he's not thinking about understanding, he's thinking about revenge. But that's the first part of the film where it is Fritz the Cat manipulating these girls. The second part of the film is when Fritz the Cat goes up to Harlem and he meets a black crow and they hang out for a while. So it's definitely the thing, and definitely what happens is he manipulates the crowd of black crows because he's kind of saying that revolt. No more people riding around limousines, and the police are the people that are responsible for rich people living in riding around limousines. Rich people are holding you back. Rich people are taking advantage of the poor. That's true in American society. You look at how Jeff Bezos and a lot of other rich people don't pay taxes, or there's a lot of tax loops. And then also in the 1960s, not Rockefeller, but there were a lot of just descendants of Rockefeller and other companies that just that were taking advantage of people. And then also in the 70s and the 60s and 70s, a lot of young people had a hard time finding jobs because that was kind of when the job market, and there were economic issues because of the Vietnam War and other things. So there was a sense of rich people creating all these problems, and Fritz is bringing enlightenment to it, but he's telling the black mob. But the thing that I call manipulation is that when actually he's telling them to revolt, they get violent and start attacking the police, and there's people shooting. There's black crows shooting pig police, and Fritz the Cat is horrified and he's hiding. So it's almost like you instigated this revolt, this drama, but you're letting other people get killed and hurt based on your cause. And that's true about Black Lives Matter, because I think they said it's a bunch of women who run it, but when people are rioting or angry or aggressive, where are those people? They're in their mansions or whatever. And then people donate to Black Lives Matter, and what is said about them, I'm not sure if this is true or not, is that these are women, the people who run Black Lives Matter are a bunch of women living in Florida in big mansions. So they're not on the front lines actually taking damage. That's also true with churches. That like back then there'll be a lot of people donating money to churches, and the churches, will encourage all these causes or be like, you need to do this or that. And then whenever it happens in society or whatever, the pastor has like this mansion or whatever, and he's not really causing the change. There are people who are easily manipulated by people to start rioting or start revolutions, and sometimes it doesn't work out that well. Clearly in this film, there are people who are Black Crows who are members of the Black Panthers, and they're being like shot in the street. There are being bombs dropped in Harlem, and then it kind of goes again with what I said about Fritz the Cat. He started all this drama and this revolt, but he's hiding like a pussy when a honest person would just be in the fight as well. But the other thing too is that it's also another statement as well, because sometimes when people riot, usually the person who starts it is somebody that you would not expect. Like obviously Fritz the Cat is a white character, even though he's a cat, but he's telling all these African American characters, these crows, to riot. And sometimes there's been like causes in history where it's maybe the person on the opposite side who's instigating all these problems. And that's true with Black Lives Matter. Like it really came down to police brutality. So it's actually white police officers and the legal system, which is mostly run by white Christian men with racist values, they're instigating all these young Black people to kind of riot and go crazy because that's kind of what they want. And like as I always say, like the reason why they film all this stuff on the news is that way it kind of puts it in people's heads that that's how Black people are. They're crazy and violent, and then it creates that cycle of young white kids and young kids from other communities growing up to become police officers to hate Black people, and then Black people are like, okay, well, since the hatred is around, I'm gonna keep like doing this chaos, and then it's a cycle of people just causing problems for each other. So I think that's why I got out of that, and I think that also too, it's interesting that the Crows are all Black. Obviously, Black Crow, Jim Crow, the Jim Crow laws. When you think of Fritz the Cat, he's a cat, and there's a thing of a fat cat, or even though he's a young cat, maybe his father is a fat cat. So it's almost like when you look at people like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or George Bush Jr., they were kids at this time. They were young at this time. So the thing is that, there are people like that who are learning what they can learn to kind of almost cause problems in the world. So one can say it's Fritz Cat represents white privilege, because you see, he's a college student, he does drugs, he commits crimes, he's a sexual predator, he's a domestic terrorist, he drops out of college, and at the end of the film he has a huge orgy. So so if you kind of imply the symbol of the cat, the symbol of the cat, he's the son of, you would say he's not. He may be the son of a fat cat because he's still a cat. Maybe his father is a fat cat. If you apply that, then maybe this is another piece about white privilege, or just white people being able to do what they want, or lack of consequences for their actions. I was watching a film called War Games about this kid who was a hacker, and he hacked into like a computer that almost started World War III. But it's kind of like, I was even talking about that when I was reviewing War Games, about like how the main character is this white kid, but because he saves the day, people don't forget that he's a digital terrorist, and also that he's like stealing money and other things. So it's just like, and you see that a lot in a lot of old films where it's like the white character, the white kid does a bunch of crimes or whatever, but because he's the hero, there's never really like, okay, well, you still got to pay for your crimes. There's just this everybody's just celebrating him as a hero at the end of the day. And I think that you see that in Fritz. And you can even say it's a satire of white privilege. The last part of the film is about manipulation of domestic terrorism. So what happens is that Fritz, meets this neo-Nazi bunny biker, and he gets part, and he joins like this group that's kind of like a cult. Like they beat this woman like with a chain, and like there's another creature that wears like a red occult robe. So what happens is that they kind of convince Fritz the Cat to blow up a power plant, and that's also part of that too, is that there's a lot of people who stand for different causes, but they're going to manipulate people to do domestic terrorism. And and ultimately it's just that thing too, like where Fritz gets hurt. Obviously, he's close to the explosion. In real life, he would be dead. But in the end of the day, he's in the hospital. He's a criminal because that happens with a lot of like domestic terrorist groups, where or even like when I was in Occupy on Wall Street, there's Occupy New Haven. There are people in black masks and black like get up, giving out books on like holes in police armor. That if you were going to hurt a police officer, hit their feet because that's the weakest part in their armor, and then also encouraging people to riot and go crazy. So there are people like that in our world, that just encourage more violence and then manipulate people or be like, oh, what, you think you're hard, but you're not hard until you actually do this for us. That's the same thing with gangs when they encourage, like in some gangs, the initiation is that you kill somebody from a rival gang to get in. So there's lots and lots of themes within Fritz the Cat. I think overall, it's not that good of a movie. Like the audio's bad, the sound design's bad. I know this was like in the 60s and they had a hard time making this film. No, this is 1972, but they had a very hard time making this film. And then also, definitely the sex scenes are a little outrageous. They're not really necessary. And I think some people said that Fritz the Cat is a very despicable character. So I think when you look at it in the eyes of 2020, this film would be banned because it's really a character that kind of, when you watch it, is a very big allegory for white privilege, but also very, very misogynist, and also like you see in old films, like I was talking about in WW's Dallas, that he's kind of like the big dude for like having sex with like 4 or 5 different female characters. So there's a lot of talking points to this film, but I found the talking point that I wanted to talk about in this video. I don't want to say all of them because there's other people who should watch and get what they want to out of it. And I definitely think it's very reflective of the time that people were just wanting to cause change. Some people were lost and confused and easily manipulated. And there are people like Fritz the Cat in the world who manipulated those people and got what he wanted. And technically, and I do agree with this, that if you look at Fritz the Cat, he is a despicable character. I think obviously you hear the Fritz the Cat theme song, and there's some scenes where he's doing some cool stuff. So obviously, he is a bad boy, but I think back then, like I've said about sexual predatory behavior or like a person or a man having sex with a bunch of women, that was kind of really seen as cool, or like he's the big dude for doing that. But nowadays, we kind of look at that as a predator versus like back then. So it's just different time, different values type of thing. So it's a hard film to watch for a lot of people because it's definitely a very, very dated one, and I think a lot of people would be like kind of more angry with the film than anything else nowadays.